Hi. On Sci-Fi Talk today, we celebrate Rod Serling's 100th birthday that took place last year. And I have author of the Twilight Zone Companion, now Volume 3, and Marc Scott Zicree. And this is Sci-Fi Talk, the podcast on how sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and comics help us explore our humanity. So there's two books that really commemorate Rod Serling. And the first is from his daughter, Anne, As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling. And the Twilight Zone Companion, as I mentioned earlier. Volume 3, we talk about those books, plus the Twilight Zone itself, including certain episodes really starting from the original Where Is Everybody, all the way to the Night Gallery episode, They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. And he also gives us an update on Space Command. Marc Scott Zicree.
Sure.
Marc, to commemorate this wonderful birthday of, turns out my favorite writer, probably of all time, Rod Serling. There's two books. First, we'll go with Anne's book is As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod. And she wrote, really, this is good to kind of get to know the man, what he was like when he wasn't writing these amazing episodes. And Twilight Zone Companion, volume number 3. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. More interviews and more on the Twilight Zone. Just amazing.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride. And Anne's book is terrific because it takes you sort of into their home and you get to feel what he was like as a dad, which was really quite wonderful. And then the Twilight Zone Companion gives you all the ins and outs of the show with over 100 interviews with all the people who worked on the show and all sorts of stuff. So it's I did the first edition of that book when I was in my early 20s, and it's been in print ever since, and I just updated it recently.
More on Rod Serling's 100th birthday in a moment. Yeah, I got one of the first ones, I think, and we talked about it in the past, how I love. Two things before we continue about Rod. How did the fires affect you, or did they not affect you in California?
Thanks for asking. We actually had the order to prepare to evacuate, but unfortunately didn't have to evacuate. So it came up within about a mile of our home.
Wow.
And a friend of mine lost her house. She had just bought a house recently, and so that was, really, really sad. But we just that's where it's very important to have a community and to help each other through hard times because I've let all of my friends know that they're not alone, and whatever comes up in the days and years to come, please don't suffer in silence.
Yeah, I've been urging people on podcast episodes and also on my website to donate to the American Red Cross, who do such amazing work. And I can't thank enough those amazing first responders out there and firefighters that just did this amazing superhero like work. Amazing.
Yes.
And before we move on again, I had to congratulate you on Space Command.
Thank you. It's
the DVD is out. It's great.
Yes, thank you. Well, we're currently shooting hours 7 and 8 of the 12-hour season, and we're also shooting a feature that my wife is writing and directing, and we're ramping up to do 5 2-hour pilots that we're co-creating with the creators of The Expanse and Farscape and so forth. So it's really fun, and we have our own studio, 3 sound stages. We were just shooting the other night, and we were just on a meeting with our team this morning to schedule shooting throughout the next month or two. So it's a dream come true.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've talked to those gentlemen that were doing The Expanse, and they are phenomenal. And that was a great show. So, boy, talk about being in good hands. You can't get any better than those guys. They also wrote Children of Men, too, which is a great film.
Well, the funny thing was I met Mark Fergus and Hawk Ostby are the names. They were the showrunners as well. Mm-hmm. And Mark Fergus, it turns out he read the Twilight Zone Companion when he was a teenager, and that's what made him decide to become a writer. And so we've become very good friends, and it's really lovely to have had that effect on the current generation of showrunners who are doing such wonderful work. Mm-hmm. So I wrote the book to learn how to write and produce TV, and a lot of other people did too.
No, that's great. What do you think Rod would feel about, from what you know from Anne and just your own recollections, how he would feel about how he is really still to this day, people watch, and there's Twilight Zone marathon every year
Yes.
and still watch the episodes and get something out of it.
Well, I think he'd be amazed and very, very gratified. He uh, he was a very outspoken man, and the great thing is that he had the clarity to speak out against dictatorship and authoritarianism and mob hysteria and all these important things. But it was within the guise of an entertainment show, so it's entertaining while it's also telling you, well, this is how this is what you should be on the lookout for and, guard against. And so the reason the Twilight Zone lasts viewing after viewing is because they're human stories. They're stories that get to the human heart. They're not just about the gimmick. We've all seen TV shows and movies. Sometimes people say to me, well, what was that movie about? And I'll say, well, that movie was about 2 hours because it wasn't about anything else. But with Serling, with Twilight Zone, it's a meal that really fills you up, again and again.
Yeah, even the subsequent versions to kind of revive it.
Yeah.
There were some really good writers. I liked the J. Michael Straczynski version. I thought that was pretty good. They had some gems in there. But, it's just what's missing is Rod is such a part of the show.
Exactly.
It's irreplaceable.
Exactly. He's one of a kind, It's like, you don't say, how come we don't get more Leonardo da Vinci's or more, Vincent van Goghs? They're geniuses. And so Rod was one of a kind. And thank God he got to have Twilight Zone where he could really have full artistic control because, he deserved it and certainly utilized it.
I want to get your thoughts. I actually just looked at an article this morning about movies that kind of took a Twilight Zone premise, and turned into a feature. One of the most famous, The Nightmare on Elm Street, from Perchance to Dream. I mean, it's it's amazing.
Yeah, and even a lot of movies have. Poltergeist certainly is very reminiscent of Little Girl Lost, and there's many, many, many films that are because again, that whole generation of writers and directors grew up with Twilight Zone, and so it really resonates. It's had a huge ripple effect.
Yeah, it really has. Another one, Mirror Image.
Yes.
Us by Mr. Peele, who did this Twilight Zone series as well. But
yes, exactly.
It's incredible. Episode wise, the Twilight Zone twist I thought was born with the first episode, Where Is Everybody?
Yes. Where he's been hallucinating this whole episode, and it wakes up and he's in an isolation booth being trained for a moon mission, astronaut trainee. But Rod actually had in mind another twist ending on that, which he did in the short story, which is in the whole bulk of the story where he's wandering around this deserted town, not knowing who he is. He gets a theater ticket. He goes into a movie theater and he tears a ticket and he puts the half of the ticket in his pocket, and at the end, when the astronaut is being carried out of the isolation booth, he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out the ticket stub. So that was a little extra Twilight Zone twist, which is very fun. But Rod really loved story. He loved telling stories, and he loved people. He was very interested in the average guy, bank tellers and sales girls and so forth, people waiting in bus stations. He really he was never a snob. He was never better than anybody else. He really loved people. And in conversation, he would want to, Burgess Meredith told me when I interviewed him, he said, like many good writers, Rod listened more than he talked. And that was, absolutely.
Yeah. One thing he did, I thought that was really unique, and not just in the Twilight Zone, like with Requiem for a Heavyweight, for example. In particular, boxers, he kind of liked to showcase people that were not exactly at their top peak. They were actually on their way down, and to tell those stories as opposed to, everybody likes a hero and likes somebody that is on top of everything, but I always liked that about him.
Yes, well, it's great because he really, again, had great empathy for people, great compassion. And, it's Twilight Zone generally is not about, kings and presidents and the people running, things. It's about the people you encounter in your daily life, and, they might have astronauts in Twilight Zone, but that's about as high as you get in terms of the pecking order. And, no, it's I mean, you get a sense with Rod, even just watching Twilight Zone, that he'd be a great guy to sit down and have a drink with and
Oh,
just get to know. And by doing the Twilight Zone book, I was able to go do that deep dive. I found video and audio tape of him teaching a class where he would bring a 16 millimeter print of a Twilight Zone episode, screen it, and then talk about it. And
oh,
these were classes that he knew wouldn't be aired, so he was totally candid, and it was wonderful. It was like being a fly on the wall in those classes, and I just loved
nice.
it.
I wonder if he would have probably been somebody who could do a good spy drama, because I'm thinking of the Martin Landau episode, Jeopardy
Yes,
Room. Uh,
yes, yes.
that, I mean, that was a very unlikely Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a handful of Twilight Zone episodes that have no fantasy element. I mean, you could even say that about the first episode, Where Is Everybody? It's about a guy who has a hallucination, and there's the other one where the guy agrees not to speak for a year, and it turns out he has his vocal cords severed because he wants to win the bet. But Jeopardy Room is definitely one of those. It was directed by Richard Donner, who later would do Lethal Weapon and Superman, and Martin Landau's terrific in it, but it's very much a Cold War drama, and could have been on any number of other shows. It didn't have to be a Twilight Zone, but again, Rod had such enthusiasm for story that sometimes he would come up with an idea, and it's like, well, it's his show. He can, he can do something different every now and then. So that's what he did.
He also was at the cutting edge of doing something serious about AI, especially in the episode The
Yes,
Lonely. And
yes.
obviously now it is very much something that we're all thinking about.
Yes, and that's such a great episode about a guy on who's in he's serving time on an asteroid, and he's going crazy from loneliness, and a captain gives him a female robot to keep him company. He falls in love with her, and it comes to a head when he's given a pardon, but he can't take her with him, and it's a wonderful episode and harrowing. The ending shot of that thing is just, it's like ooh, but and Jack Warden is terrific in
Oh,
that
yeah. Oh,
and yeah, but again, Rod really had a sense of people suffering, people going through things, life and death, love, loss. These are common themes that you write about when you're writing about people, when you're writing about them well. And Rod was a master at that.
oh, you mentioned it. It was a who's who of people that went on to have great careers on this show.
Yes,
I thought
yes,
Jack Klugman did some of his best work on the Twilight Zone,
absolutely,
and so
absolutely.
many.
Yeah,
John Anderson, who actually worked on Star Trek: The Next Generation too,
yes, yes,
underrated actor, and he was so Passage for Trumpet. I mean, he was
yeah,
just so good. So
phenomenal.
many
Yeah,
people. Do you have a
yeah.
favorite?
Gosh, I mean, well, Jack Klugman's performances in the four episodes he did, Death Ship, Passage
Yeah.
for Trumpet, In Praise of Pip. I mean,
Yes.
incredible stuff. And and then, but of course, like in Praise of Pip, he's got Billy Mooney to work with and work off of. Billy Mooney did three episodes of Twilight Zone before he was ever in Lost in Space, and it's great because on Space Command, of course, he's one of our cast members. So to work with him is such fun, and these people are phenomenally talented. And yeah, I interviewed John Anderson, by the way, when I wrote the Twilight Zone Companion, and we talked
Nice.
about the two episodes he did. He did that. He did Passage for Trumpet, playing the Angel Gabriel, and then he was in the Odyssey of Flight 33 as the captain of an airliner that goes back in time to the dinosaur period. And he was just he was a wonderful actor and not well known, but just really solid. And we talked about how in Passage for Trumpet, when he shows up at the end, there's a point where he's standing under a scaffolding for a construction site, and there's this little work light, and it forms a halo over his head, and it's just
Yes.
a little symbol that you'll get if you're watching it, but it's very subtle and really really lovely.
What a lovely touch that was. I
Mm.
always admired that. I think you pointed it out in your book when I first
Yes.
read it. Spoke to Philip Pine a few years ago, more than a
Mm.
few years ago. He
Yeah.
sadly has passed.
Yes.
But he said, asked him about The Four of Us Are Dying. And I
Yes.
said, so how was it? And he goes, well, Rod was great, but you did not change a word in the script. Whatever was written, you said it because that's what he really wanted. But he
Yeah.
was a lovely man to work for.
Yes, and he was very appreciative and he was very collaborative. He told me about when George Clayton Johnson, one of the other writers, came on set, and George was feeling a little uncomfortable because he was thinking, well, am I an interloper here? This isn't, he wrote Kick the Can, he wrote Nothing in the Dark, great scripts. And Rod shows up with some visitors he's giving a tour to, and he introduces George as this amazing writer who's just given us this great episode that we're shooting now. And George was being treated with great respect, even though it was Rod's show. And Rod also had great respect for directors, for actors. I mean, those of us who work in TV and film, we work in TV and film because we love the collaboration. We love working with actors and everyone along the line, editors. It's like being in a kitchen making a really great dish with a group of other people who really love food. And so that's why we do it. Novelists are the people who stay in their room and they write, and they're just pale, sad people. But I've written novels successfully, and I have many friends who are novelists. But it would not suit me to do it full time. I would go out of my mind. I love being with other people.
There is more sci-fi talk, so stay tuned.
One of the things I admired about him, and we touched upon it because he looked at humanity and really looked at it well, but kind of something that is kind of fading away, but the desire for the small town, the simpler life. Kick the Can was kind of looking back at your youth to be young again.
Yes.
Even A Stop at Willoughby was a guy who was in a pressure-filled world, and which kind of reminds me a little bit of Patterns, a little bit too, the thing he wrote on television. So
yeah, well, it's really interesting because there are 3 scripts that Rod wrote that are sort of the parabola of his career, which is Patterns, which was a live TV show he wrote in the 50s, which is about a hot young executive on the rise. And then he did Walking Distance, where the executive's successful, but kind of weary, kind of wishing he could go back to his childhood, kind of wishing he could be back in his hometown. And then finally, on Night Gallery, he did the Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, which is the executive when he's really on the way out and weary and just feeling like all these guys are just waiting to stab him in the back and take his job. And Rod was not a depressive by any means. He was a hugely successful man to the end of his days. But I think that reflects him. It's kind of like looking in the mirror a bit and saying, okay, where am I in my career, where I'm in my life, and talking about it. It's very interesting. And it was fascinating to go to Binghamton, Rod's hometown, for one of the Serling celebrations, and to see the bandstand in the park and the carousel and all these things he wrote about. And interestingly enough, his house, his family home is still there. And so to see that was, it really resonates when you watch Walking Distance. That's the most autobiographical of Rod's Twilight Zone episodes, and just a jewel, just gorgeous.
Besides Rod, another writer on the show that I thought was amazing, did some fantastical stuff, Charles Beaumont. I mean, he was just absolutely amazing, the stuff he wrote. Well, you write about him in your book, of course.
But it's interesting because initially Rod accepted unsolicited submissions, and they got 5,000 scripts sent in, and his team read through about 500 of them, and none of them were usable. He said the writers needed therapy more than anything, and he was sort of at a loss. So he called up Ray Bradbury. He knew Ray, and Ray was going to be a writer on the show, and he said, "What do I do? What do I do?" And Ray said, "Come over to the house." And he took him down into the basement where his office was, and he pulled 4 books out of the shelf. One was by him, one was by one of his proteges, Richard Matheson, and the other was by one of his proteges, Charles Beaumont, and then there was a third by a British writer named John Collier. And he said, read these and then let's talk. And Beaumont and Matheson became the core writers, along with George Clayton Johnson, of Twilight Zone. There was one other, Earl Hamner, who created the Waltons, and those are more bucolic kind of scripts. But Beaumont, Matheson, and George Clayton Johnson were all proteges of Ray Bradbury, and phenomenal writers, unique. But Beaumont was singular. He was an amazing writer. He died very young. He died of presenile dementia at age 38. Started suffering the symptoms of it at 33. So actually, for the last year and a half of Twilight Zone, he was finding it increasingly difficult to write. He could still pitch a story and sell a story, but so some of his friends were actually writing with him pseudonymously or under ghostwriting. So in fact, the Talkie Tina episode, one of the most famous episodes of Twilight Zone, Living Doll was actually written by a writer named Jerry Soule. So he and Beaumont plotted it together, and then Jerry Soule wrote it. And none of this was known to the public until I found out about it when I was researching the Twilight Zone Companion. So I'm glad that Jerry Soule was able to get the credit for his work, and it's so tragic about Beaumont. But thank God he worked in film and TV, where we can still enjoy his work, and in books as well. You can read his short stories and his novels. And interestingly enough, while Twilight Zone was in production, Roger Corman decided to direct and produce a movie called The Intruder, which is based on one of Beaumont's novels about a rabble-rouser going down south and stirring up racial tensions. And so it starred William Shatner, and a lot of the Twilight Zone writers went down to be in the movie. John Tomerlin and George Clayton Johnson and William F. Nolan, who George wrote Logan's Run with. And it's really fun. And Beaumont plays a school principal, so it's really fun to watch that movie and see these guys, what they were like back in the day when they were working on Twilight Zone. George Clayton Johnson and William F. Nolan firebomb a church in that movie. so they were having a great time. And but yeah, these people were all friends. They were all getting together regularly, talking about stories and movies and TV shows, and just really, these are guys. You're talking about guys in their late 20s and early 30s. I mean, these are not old men by any means. And it's amazing that George Clayton Johnson could write Kick the Can. He was like late 20s, early 30s when he wrote that, and yet it's one of the greatest pieces ever written about old age and how to stay young, and the fact that you can't do it alone. You have to have other people. And it's a wonderful piece of writing.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. Hey, it's an amazing someone so young would have that kind of insight. But,
yes.
Hey, I appreciate it, especially as I get older.
Yes.
I appreciate it. And I've always kept that theme with me about, you are as young as you feel, and you take the steps to stay that way. So
yes. And again, Twilight Zone has such great real life lessons. It's sort of, you can watch that episode, and even when you know what the gag is at the end, it's about life, and it's about how to hold on to being young in your heart and in your life, and not and the irony that his best friend doesn't go with him, doesn't play kick the can with him, and doesn't have the magic happen to him. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. And then in Nothing in the Dark, George is also dealing with the whole notion of death, the inevitability of death, and what that means, and all of that. It's just these are men writing very deeply about issues that are very much on their minds. They're brilliant fantasy and science fiction writers, but also these are guys recently married, just raising small children. They're dealing with those issues of everything. And so Twilight Zone is not meaningless by any means. It has deep meanings from episode to episode, and including something like Eye of the Beholder, where there's a woman wrapped with her face wrapped in bandages, hoping she's been made to look normal at last. And if she's not made to look normal, she'll be shipped off to essentially a concentration camp, a reservation. And she's talking about the rights of the disabled, and why can't we? She says, I just would like to have a job, any job, just be able to sit in the park. Why it's the fact that I'm different? Why does that make me excluded? Why does that make me other? And so these are issues. Rod was writing that back in 1960, and yet it's as current now as ever, if not more so.
It's so funny. Certain episodes I have a fondness for, and I know you did not give this one.
Which one?
The one where the devil is essentially trapped. But I always looked at I always looked at
that. I like that one.
I kind of looked at it as an urban legend kind of story more than anything else, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, my friend Doug Hayes directed that, and H.M. Wynan stars in it, and he's still alive. He's in his he's like 98 now.
Oh, God bless him.
So, but it has John Carradine, and John Carradine said to Doug, how big do you want me to be? How over the top do you want me to be? And Doug said, go for it. Just go for it. There's no such thing as being too big when he plays the hermit who's in charge of this place. And it's just a great episode. It's so much fun. And Doug really loved doing it. It was a great episode.
One of the many topics he touched on was war.
Yes.
Episodes like the Purple Testament, and also
Quality of Mercy. Yeah.
Quality of Mercy.
Yeah.
I mean, I read an article today about how some of those things, some episodes don't age well. And
right.
I can The portrayal of Asians in that when he's in that makeup, probably not good, but it doesn't deter from the theme
Right.
of the episode.
No, and again, Rod, Rod's trying to make a statement of empathy and compassion, of seeing the enemy not as the enemy, but as a human being just like yourself. And yes, were that episode done now, obviously you would cast an Asian actor in the lead, but still, on its own merits, it's a great episode. And later, George Takei starred in one of the Twilight Zone episodes, so they were, they got the message eventually. But again, Twilight Zone, considering the fact that Twilight Zone was made from 1959 to 1964, it's incredibly timely. And it still holds up. The fact that it's in black and white, common wisdom is that young people won't watch black and white movies or TV shows. Twilight Zone is a total exception to that. Young people love Twilight Zone because it's gorgeous. When something's exquisite, people recognize the quality, and so it hasn't lost any of its popularity over all these years.
I'd like to get your thoughts on an actor who really doesn't get the acclaim. What a solid actor, and he was really talented, Ivan Dixon.
Yes, my God. In The Big Tall Wish, he's brilliant as the officer who ultimately can't accept magic and loses the miracle because of that. And the little boy is so terrific in that episode. And the thing I love about that episode also is it's not overtly about race. The main characters in it are black, but it's about, that story would work with a white actor or a black actor. It's about a human being and his relationship to the other human beings in his life. It's a wonderful piece of writing. And Ivan Dixon's best known, of course, for Hogan's Heroes, where he was one of the regulars of the show, but he was a phenomenal actor. And again, Rod at the time was talking, when he was interviewed about that episode, he was talking about, black actors don't get the opportunities they should. And Rod very much wanted to give actors opportunities. And, so again, he's, Rod, it's funny because when I was going through Rod's scrapbooks, when I was researching the book, he had these big, thick volumes of every article, everything written about him year by year. And I turned the page and there was a 8x10 of Rod with Martin Luther King. And of course, that was no surprise that they would each other. And, I have a check that Rod wrote, a canceled check that Rod wrote to the NAACP, so again, he's, Rod was outspoken about what he believed. And again, he was on the right side of everything because the moment you embrace compassion as your operating principle and empathy, then, you're going to see other people, whether they're black, white, women, whatever, as same as you, as human beings, and treat them with equal respect. And Rod certainly did that.
Night Gallery, how do you look back on that now?
Well, Night Gallery, Rod assumed he would be treated with respect and have his say. And unfortunately, Jack Laird, who was the producer on that show, he and Rod were just butting heads all the time. And so Rod was able to get some good scripts through, The Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, Messiah on Mott Street, a few others. But in many cases, he was feeling very constrained, very censored. There's a number of his scripts that did not get made. He wrote for Night Gallery and they just never got shot. And so, again, you need, because it is a collaborative medium, you do need people who are on the same wavelength. And with Twilight Zone, Rod had the power, and he had producers like Buck Houghton, supporting him, supporting his vision. Sadly, with Night Gallery, it wasn't the same story. And but at least there's some episodes that are wonderful and you can enjoy. So that's kind of like, Rod felt like sort of a bruised warrior after that experience. And
there were some gems there for sure.
There were, definitely. Yeah. And Rod never stopped writing, never stopped working. He was always, in interviews, sometimes he'd disparage himself. Like one of his last interviews, he said, well, he doesn't think his work will be remembered or all these things. But that wasn't reflective of what he was actually doing day to day. Day to day, he was sitting down, he was writing, he was working and loving his family and having a great time. And so it was, so any biography that presents him as this terrible, tragic figure really is not seeing the reality.
For maybe people know or don't know that he actually wrote a draft of the original Planet of the Apes film.
Yes, well, that whole ending with the Statue of Liberty, that was Rod's idea.
Wow.
The main difference in the scripts was that simply they needed, in the novel and in Rod's version, it's a modern technological society, but with apes. And the studio felt that would be too expensive, so they hired another writer to make it more like kind of, the way it is in the movie. There's a wonderful graphic novel that just came out recently that's Rod Serling's version of Planet of the Apes. It's
Oh,
adapted
nice.
script, so you can find it if you just look for Planet of the Apes graphic novel, and it's really wonderful to see. But but Rod understood that in film he didn't have power, whereas in things like Twilight Zone he did. So he was a realist, and he was not going to be a problem. He was much on the side of production logistics and realities.
Kind of segueing to Space Command, when can we see something new?
Well, I have a YouTube channel called Mr. Sci-Fi, SCI-FI, Mr. Sci-Fi.
Nice.
And we've been shooting ongoingly. So the first 2 hours of Space Command, which just won the Film Threat Award, this award, in fact,
Hey, nice.
here it is, best science fiction feature. Here it is,
Nice.
amongst my other awards. But we're currently on post production on hours 4 and 5. We're shooting hours 7 and 8 of the 12-hour season. So I've been posting rough cuts and the works in progress on my Mr. Sci-Fi channel, so you can actually see the episodes in progress and see how they start to get visual effects shots plugged in and get refinements. And we just shot this past weekend. We shot a fake commercial in the episode we're shooting now, the 2-hour episode. It's called The Great Solar War, and it has this evil corporation, multi-planetary corporation called Smile Corps, and their motto is "We make happy." And so we just shot a commercial that shows all these products they make in this happy family, and then it cuts, of course, to the workers who are like oppressed and being treated dreadfully. And but so we shot the commercial. One of our investors, he and his kids were in the commercial, and I just posted that on Mr. Sci-Fi, and it's just fun. I love the speed that you can do television now.
Oh,
the
yeah,
fact that we shot it on Sunday. Tuesday we were editing it.
Wow.
Wednesday I was giving notes to tweak it, and now we've got it. It's done basically, and
wow.
so that's really, really fun. And then we're going to be shooting, in about a week and a half again, and then on it goes, And when we're creating an ensemble of actors, Robert Picardo, Doug Jones,
Yes.
Barbara Bain is part of our.
Oh, wow, great! What a legend.
Veronica Cartwright, Gates McFadden, all these wonderful actors and actresses.
Nice.
Of course, and so what we do is we plug them into series and movies and so forth, so that you'll see them in one role in one show and another role in a different one. And in fact, there's a show I'm creating with Rockneil Bannon, who created Farscape and Defiance and Alienation and Sequest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a show called Sweet Haven, where a bioengineered disease kills everyone in the world under 60, and the people 60 and above have to figure out how to save humanity when they can't reproduce. And so we're about to start shooting that. It stars Michael Harney from Orange is the New Black and Bob Picardo and Marta Kristen from Lost in Space, and Veronica Cartwright and Gates McFadden, and on Barbara Bain. And it's just going to be so much fun to start shooting that. And I love actors, and they're so talented and so collaborative. It's just a joy. And this is all stuff I learned from writing the Twilight Zone Companion and learning how to write and produce TV. It was, quality doesn't come by accident. It comes from everyone bringing their A game, and it takes a lot of people to make a TV show, but at the end of the day, it's worth it. I love television. I'm the first generation of TV kids. I have a memory of myself at like maybe 2 or 3 years old, sitting with my little Mickey Mouse hat on this little wicker chair, watching the Mickey Mouse Club on TV. And so I love television from as far back as I can remember.
Yeah, for me, it was The Adventures of Superman. That did it.
Yes, George
Reeves. Yeah,
you bet. I love that as a kid. And again, the wonderful thing about TV is that you can see the exact same episodes now that you saw 40, 50 years ago.
I know.
And I love the permanence of the medium. I would never be a playwright, or, it's like those. I appreciate playwriting, but it's not what I want, because I want to create the artwork and have it last.
Yes.
That's the thing I envisioned, so.
Absolutely.
So I like that. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're having fun.
Yes. Yes. We'll have 3 sound stages full of spaceship sets and giant robots.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that is cool.
Anytime you're in Los Angeles, I'll be happy to give you a tour.
Oh, man, I would love to do that. Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. But
that
sounds
great.
This is a dream come true. When I was 10 years old, I got to go on the set of the original Star Trek for the last episode.
Wow.
Shot. And I got to sit in the captain's chair and stand on the transporter, see the little light that was plugged in above. And And I said, I want my own studio. I want one of these.
Yeah.
And so
That's a
now I have one.
great set to sit on, I'll tell you.
It's a joy. So between crowdfunding and selling investment shares, my fans have given me over $4 million. And
Wow, that's great.
and now I'm raising another 20 million to shoot the five pilots and the feature we're doing. So I have no complaints.
That's great. That's great. Well, great to reminisce with you and also get an update on Space Command and
Thank you.
Twilight Zone Companion Volume 3.
Yes.
And again, Anne Serling's book is As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod. And if you want to know what the man was like, that's a very sweet look back at what he was like. And probably easily one of the best writers ever, at least in my book.
What I found in my career in Hollywood is that there's a quality of authenticity to the great people.
Yeah.
You know, what you see on Twilight Zone, that's Rod, and you like him, and he does not disappoint. The more you know about him, he never disappoints. He's a wonderful, warm, loving, brilliant, funny, great guy.
Yeah.
You know, we're lucky we had him.
And even if you don't see the show, if you go to Disney World, you'll see Rod at Tower of Terror every day. He's there.
Yes.
Some guy did a good impression of him for a little bit, but some of it is Rod, which is cool. So every time I go, I always smile when I see him there. It's great.
Yes.
Well, thank you again, and best of luck with Space Command and Twilight Zone. That's a great book, The Companion. I love it. Check out those two books, As I Knew Him, My Dad, Rod Serling by Anne Serling, and The Twilight Zone Companion, Volume Number 3. You can sample Sci-Fi Talk Plus at sci-fi-talk.com. There you can hear commercial-free episodes that to my subscribers are released early. Enjoy samples of my video content too, the latest trailers and clips teaser, and also Behind the Curtain on the Gorge. Additionally, I'm releasing a special video episode of this podcast with pictures from the different episodes we talk about, and much more. You can subscribe there, or also there's a link in the show notes. You get a free 1-year trial and a low forever price of only 99 cents per month. Thanks for listening. I'm Tony Tolato.